My parents tried to pressure me into marrying a man who had been divorced twice. I refused and walked away. 2 years later, he came back claiming I was mentally unstable and begging me to return, but he never expected the evidence I had kept. Hello everyone. Before we start, please subscribe our channel and help us reach our first 100 subscribers. My name is Lauren Hayes. I'm 28 years old, and my parents stopped calling me their daughter the day I refused to marry the man they'd already chosen for me. They said I was selfish, ungrateful, immature. The man they wanted me to marry smiled the entire time. He never once asked what I wanted. He simply looked at me and said, "You'll understand after we're married." I looked him straight in the eyes. There won't be a wedding. I walked out of my parents' house that afternoon, carrying one suitcase. 2 years later, the same man stood outside my front door. My parents stood beside him. He smiled politely and said, "Lauren isn't mentally well. She doesn't know what's best for herself." Then he asked me to come home. I quietly walked to my office, opened a locked drawer, and pulled out the folder I'd been keeping since the day I left. Looking back, none of this happened overnight. I grew up in a quiet town in Virginia. My parents believed security was more important than happiness. Dad owned a small construction company. Mom handled the office. Everything in our family revolved around reputation. What people thought mattered. What neighbors said mattered. How we appeared to the community mattered. My dreams didn't. I wanted to become an architect. Ever since I was a little girl, I'd filled notebooks with house designs. I loved drawing, planning spaces, imagining homes where families actually wanted to be together. Dad always smiled politely. Then he'd say, "That's a nice hobby." Mom would add, "You'll have plenty of time for hobbies after you're married." I assumed they were joking. They weren't. After college, I accepted a position at a respected architecture firm. I loved every minute of it. Long hours, demanding projects, impossible deadlines, none of it bothered me, because I was finally building the life I'd imagined. Then one Sunday afternoon, Mom asked me to come home for dinner. "I'd like you to meet someone." I thought she meant one of Dad's business partners. Instead, a man nearly 15 years older than me stood in their living room. His name was Victor Caldwell. Expensive suit, luxury watch, perfect smile. He shook my hand confidently. "I've heard wonderful things about you." I smiled politely. "It's nice to meet you." Dinner felt strange from the beginning. Mom kept complimenting Victor. Dad laughed at every story he told. Nobody asked me a single question. Finally, dessert arrived. Dad folded his hands. "Victor is looking for a wife." I almost laughed, until I realized nobody else was. Mom smiled warmly. "We think you'd make a wonderful couple." I looked around the table, waiting for someone to admit it was a joke. Nobody did. I quietly answered, "I'm not interested." Victor smiled. "Perhaps you simply need time." "I don't." Mom frowned. "Don't be rude. I'm being honest." The evening ended awkwardly. I assumed that would be the end of it. Instead, it became the beginning. Over the following months, Victor somehow appeared everywhere. Church, family barbecues, holiday dinners, even my birthday. I never invited him. Someone else always had. Whenever I politely declined another invitation, Mom sighed dramatically. "You're throwing away a wonderful opportunity." Dad agreed. "He's successful. He owns several businesses. He could give you a comfortable life." I answered the same way every time. "I already like my life." That answer frustrated them, because my parents believed happiness came from security, not independence. One evening, Victor asked if we could talk privately. We sat on the back porch. He smiled calmly. "I know this is unusual." "It is, but your parents only want what's best." I looked directly at him. "What do you want?" He hesitated. "A partner. I want someone who respects me." "I also want that." He smiled. "Then we're looking for the same thing." "No, we're not." He looked confused. "I want to choose the person I marry." His smile disappeared for the first time. A week later, curiosity got the better of me. I wasn't looking for gossip. I simply wanted to know more about someone my parents trusted so completely. Everything I reviewed came from public records and ordinary conversations with people who knew him professionally. I learned he had been married twice. Both marriages had ended years apart. That alone didn't concern me. People divorce for many reasons. But I also noticed something else. Whenever anyone asked why those marriages ended, the stories never matched. One person described constant legal disputes. Another mentioned business disagreements spilling into family life. Someone else simply said, they weren't happy. None of it proved wrongdoing. But together, the inconsistencies made me realize something important. I didn't know this man well enough to even consider marrying him. And I wasn't willing to gamble my future on pressure from anyone. I sat down with my parents one final time. I've made my decision. Mom folded her arms. We already know it. I'm not marrying Victor. Dad's face hardened. You're embarrassing this family. No, I'm making my own choice. Victor remained completely calm, then quietly said, I think you're confused. I smiled politely. No, I'm certain. Mom stood up. If you leave today, don't expect this house to always be here. I nodded. I wasn't planning to come back. That afternoon, I packed my belongings, signed the lease on a small apartment near my office, and started over. The first year wasn't easy. Money was tight. I worked late, accepted every project I could. Slowly, my career grew. Eventually, I became the lead architect on a major community project. I bought a small townhouse, adopted a rescue dog named Bailey, built a peaceful life. For 2 years, I heard almost nothing from my parents, until one rainy Saturday morning. The doorbell rang. I opened the door. Mom, Dad, and Victor standing together, as though no time had passed. Mom smiled nervously. We need to talk. Victor spoke before I could answer. Lauren, I've been telling your parents, you're not acting like yourself. They're worried. Dad quietly added, we think you've been making decisions out of fear. I stared at all three of them. Then Victor calmly said, you should come home. It's time. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply smiled. Wait here. I walked into my home, past the living room, into my office, unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk, and pulled out a thick folder I'd kept untouched for 2 years. Inside were notes, emails, public documents, and every conversation I'd carefully documented after leaving. When I returned to the front door, Victor saw the folder. For the first time since we'd met, his confident smile disappeared. Sometimes, the strongest answer isn't spoken in the moment. Sometimes, it's quietly preserved until the day the truth finally needs a voice. As Victor stared at the folder in my hands, and my parents realized I'd kept far more than memories from the day I left, I knew the conversation was about to change forever. Victor's smile disappeared. His eyes immediately settled on the folder in my hands. My parents noticed. Mom frowned. What's that? I calmly answered, everything I wished I'd never needed to keep. I invited them inside, not because I trusted them, because I wanted the conversation to end honestly. We sat around my dining table. Nobody spoke. Finally, I opened the folder. The first section contained copies of every email and text message exchanged after I refused the marriage. I slid them across the table. Dad frowned. What is this supposed to prove? Read them. Mom picked up the first page. It contained messages she'd sent. You'll regret throwing your future away. Victor is trying to save you from making a mistake. No respectable man will wait forever. Then came Victor's messages. Always polite, always calm, yet always insisting that my decision wasn't really mine. One message read, you're emotional right now. Once you've had time to think clearly, you'll realize we're meant to be together. Another said, your parents know what's best for you. I looked at him. I told you no. You kept asking. He quietly replied, I was trying to help. I answered, no. You were refusing to accept my answer. Silence filled the room. Then I opened the second section. Public court records, business filings, news articles, nothing private, nothing illegal, everything publicly available. I looked at my parents. I never claimed Victor was a criminal. I never spread rumors. I simply learned enough to realize I didn't know him well enough to marry him. Dad slowly turned the pages. His expression changed. You researched him? Yes, because no one else seemed interested in asking questions. Victor leaned back. So that's why you kept refusing. No, I refused before I ever looked. The research simply confirmed that saying no was the right decision for me. He had no answer. Finally, I removed one last document. A printed timeline. Every meeting, every phone call, every unexpected visit, every message after I'd clearly declined. I placed it in front of Victor. I documented everything. His face lost what little color remained. You thought I was dangerous. I answered honestly. I thought my boundaries weren't being respected. That's enough for me to keep records. No one spoke. After several minutes, Dad quietly looked at Victor. Is this accurate? Victor slowly nodded. I did continue contacting her. I believed she'd change her mind. Dad closed the folder, then looked at him. She already answered. Victor lowered his eyes. I know. For the first time, my father wasn't defending him. He was listening to me. Mom quietly began crying. We honestly believed we were helping. I smiled sadly. I believe you. But helping someone doesn't mean choosing their future for them. She nodded. I understand that now. Victor slowly stood. He looked at me for a long moment. I owe you an apology. You do? I confused persistence with respect. I'm sorry. I nodded once. Thank you. Then he looked at my parents. You should have accepted her decision the first day. Without another word, he quietly left. The front door closed behind him. For several moments, none of us moved. Dad finally looked around my townhouse. The framed architectural drawings, the bookshelves, the rescue dog Bailey, sleeping peacefully by the fireplace. He smiled sadly. You really built all of this yourself. I did. He looked down. I kept believing you needed someone to take care of you. You taught me how. I simply finished the job. Those words broke something inside him. He covered his face. I'm proud of you. It was the first time I'd heard those words from my father. Not because I'd obeyed him, but because I'd become myself. Mom quietly reached across the table. I don't expect you to come home. I know. But could we slowly become part of your life again? I thought about it carefully, then answered. We can start with coffee, once a month. No pressure, no expectations. She smiled through tears. I'd like that. Epilogue. Soft piano becomes warm and hopeful, carrying the quiet peace that comes when respect finally replaces control. 3 years have passed. I'm now a senior architect. The community center I helped design opened last spring. Children play there every afternoon. Families gather there every weekend. Every time I walk through its doors, I'm reminded why I chose my own path. My parents changed gradually, not through promises, through consistent actions. They stopped trying to make decisions for me. They started asking questions instead of giving instructions. Our relationship isn't perfect, but it's honest. As for Victor, about a year later, he sent one final letter. It wasn't a request. It wasn't an excuse. It simply said, "Thank you for teaching me that someone else's no doesn't need to be debated. I hope you found the life you wanted." I smiled when I read it, then quietly recycled the letter. Because some chapters don't need to be reopened to be complete. Bailey still greets every visitor like they're an old friend. My townhouse finally feels exactly the way I dreamed it would. Peaceful, safe, mine, my thoughts. Looking back, the most important word I ever said wasn't goodbye. It was no. A respectful refusal doesn't require endless explanations, and a healthy relationship, whether with family, friends, or a future partner, begins with respecting another person's choices. Sometimes, the strongest foundation you'll ever build isn't made of brick or concrete. It's the life you create after deciding that your future belongs to you.